Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship looking at the stars through the big window. His ship was called the TSF Vengeance, and it was one of the best human warships in space. Jake was a commander, which meant he was in charge of many people and had to make hard choices every day. The war between humans and the Zalarian Empire had been going on for 3 years now, and everyone was getting tired of fighting. The Zalarians were big, ugly aliens who looked like giant lizards walking on 2 legs. They had sharp teeth and claws, and they were very mean to other species in the galaxy. The war started because both humans and Zalarians wanted the same planets and the same space rocks that had valuable metals inside them. What began as small fights had turned into a big war with lots of ships shooting at each other. Jake's ship was flying near a planet called New Haven. This planet was home to many human families who had come from Earth to start new lives among the stars. The planet had farms and cities and schools just like Earth did. But the most important place on New Haven was the Bright Star Orphanage. This big building was home to 847 children who had lost their parents during the war. Some parents died fighting the Zalarians, and some parents died when alien ships attacked human colonies. The children at the orphanage were between the ages of 5 and 17. They went to school during the day and played games in the evening. The older children helped take care of the younger ones. Ms. Linda Parker was the woman in charge of the orphanage, and she loved all the children like they were her own. She made sure they had good food to eat and warm beds to sleep in. The children called her Mom Linda because she was like a mother to all of them. Far away from New Haven, Admiral Vex Taylor was planning something terrible on his big warship called the Crimson Talon. Vex Talar was one of the most important Zalarian military leaders. He had green, scaly skin and yellow eyes that glowed in the dark. His teeth were as sharp as knives, and he enjoyed hurting others. Vex Taylor thought humans were weak because they cared about their families and their children too much. The Admiral was looking at pictures and reports about New Haven. His spy ships had been watching the planet for weeks. One of the reports said, "There was a big building where humans trained their soldiers." The report was wrong, but Vex Talar believed it was true. He thought the Bright Star Orphanage was really a place where humans taught young people how to fight in the war. This was completely false, but the Zalarian spies had made a big mistake when they wrote their report. Vex Talar called his officers to a meeting in the war room of his ship. The room had big screens showing maps of human space. The Admiral pointed to New Haven with his long clawed finger. He told his officers that they were going to attack the human training facility to show humans that nowhere was safe from Zalarian power. His officers nodded and prepared their weapons for the attack. Meanwhile, on New Haven, the children at the orphanage were having a normal day. Little Bobby Chen was playing with toy spaceships in the garden. Mary Johnson was reading a book about Earth to some of the younger children. Tommy Rodriguez was helping in the kitchen getting ready for dinner. None of them knew that death was coming from the sky. Jake Morrison received an urgent message on his ship. The message said that Zalarian ships had been spotted near New Haven. Jake immediately ordered his crew to fly toward the planet as fast as possible. But New Haven was very far away, and even at top speed it would take hours to get there. Jake had a bad feeling in his stomach, but he hoped they would arrive in time to protect the people on the planet. The Zalarian fleet arrived at New Haven just as the sun was setting. Admiral Vex Talar gave the order to begin the bombing. Bright, green energy beams shot down from the alien ships toward the planet below. The beams were so hot they could turn solid rock into gas in seconds. The Admiral watched on his screen as the beams hit the target building. The Bright Star Orphanage disappeared in a flash of green light. The building that had been home to 847 children was turned into dust and ash in just a few seconds. Ms. Linda Parker and all her staff died instantly. Every single child in the orphanage died without knowing what hit them. Their toys and books and pictures were all burned up. Their dreams and hopes for the future were gone forever. Lisa Carter was an emergency worker on New Haven. When the bombing stopped, she flew to the orphanage site in her rescue ship. What she found there made her cry harder than she had ever cried in her life. There was nothing left but a huge hole in the ground filled with ash and broken pieces of metal. She searched for hours but found no survivors. The only things left were a few small shoes and some burned toys scattered around the edges of the hole. Lisa took pictures of what remained and sent them to Earth. The pictures showed tiny sneakers and a burned teddy bear lying in the gray ash. When people on Earth saw these pictures, they became very angry. The news spread quickly to every human colony and every human ship in space. Jake Morrison arrived at New Haven 6 hours too late. When he saw what the Zalarians had done to the children, his hands began to shake with rage. He had never felt such anger in his whole life. Many of his crew members were crying as they looked at the destroyed orphanage through their ship's cameras. On Earth, Roy Jenkins was a captain who worked with the government leaders. When he saw the pictures from New Haven, he knew that everything was about to change. The Zalarian Empire had just made the biggest mistake in their history. They had killed human children, and now they were going to learn why that was the worst thing they could possibly do. News reports about the orphanage bombing were on every screen and every radio across human space. People who had never cared about the war before now demanded revenge. The Zalarian Empire thought they had won a victory by destroying what they believed was a military target. They had no idea they had just signed their own death warrant. The news about the dead children spread across human space faster than any message had ever traveled before. Every human colony got the terrible news within hours. On Earth, people stopped what they were doing to watch the news reports. They saw the pictures of the tiny shoes and burned toys from the orphanage. Many people started crying when they realized that 847 innocent children had been murdered by the alien invaders. Admiral Kate Sullivan was one of the most important military leaders in human space. She worked from a big building on Earth where all the major war decisions were made. When Kate saw the pictures from New Haven, she felt something dark and cold grow inside her heart. She had been a soldier for 30 years, but she had never seen anything as evil as this attack on defenseless children. Kate immediately called for an emergency meeting with all the top military commanders. They gathered in a secret room deep underground where they could talk without anyone listening to them. The room had no windows and the walls were made of thick metal. Around the big table sat the men and women who controlled the most powerful military force in human history. President Alan Carter was the leader of all humans in space. He was normally a kind man who preferred talking to fighting, but when he saw the pictures from the orphanage, his face became hard as stone. He spoke on television to billions of humans across the galaxy. Tears ran down his face as he declared total war against the Zalarian Empire. Every human watching knew that this war would be different from all the fighting that had come before. After his speech, President Carter went to another secret meeting with only his most trusted advisors. In this meeting, he signed a document that had been locked away since the last Great War on Earth. The document was called Protocol Omega, and it contained plans for weapons and tactics that were so terrible they had never been used before. The president's hands shook as he signed the paper that would unleash humanity's darkest powers. Dr. Helen Brooks ran the secret laboratory where humans developed their most advanced weapons. She was a brilliant scientist who had spent her whole life creating new ways to fight in space. But some of her inventions were so dangerous that the government had ordered her to lock them away and never use them. These weapons were designed to kill entire planets and destroy whole solar systems. When Dr. Brooks received the orders to open her sealed files, she felt both excited and terrified. The weapons she had created years ago were based on science that most humans could not even understand. Some of the weapons could turn living creatures into dust. Others could make stars explode. She had built these terrible things hoping they would never be needed. Now that hope was gone. All across human space, ordinary people were rushing to join the military. Ben Taylor was a construction worker on a mining colony. He had never wanted to be a soldier, but when he learned that his friend's daughter Maria Santos had died in the orphanage bombing, he went straight to the military office to sign up. Thousands of other workers and farmers and teachers were doing the same thing. Steve Parker was an old Marine who had retired years ago to live quietly on a peaceful planet. When he heard about the dead children, he put on his old uniform and reported for duty. The military was happy to have him back because he was one of the best soldiers they had ever trained. Within days, Steve was put in charge of a whole regiment of volunteers who wanted to fight the aliens. On the Zalarian homeworld, Admiral Vex Tylar was celebrating what he thought was a great victory. He drank alien wine and told his officers how smart he was for destroying the human military training center. The other Zalarian commanders cheered and praised him for his brilliant attack. None of them realized they had just murdered hundreds of innocent children instead of soldiers. But Zek Miran was different from the other Zalarian officers. He was in charge of gathering information about human activities, and he was very good at his job. While the others were celebrating, Zek Miran was studying the radio signals coming from human space. What he found made his blood run cold with fear. The human radio messages were different now. They were using secret codes that the Zalarians had never seen before. The messages were being sent between human ships and bases all over the galaxy. Zek Miran could not understand what the messages said, but he could tell they were preparing something big. The tone of the human voices had changed too. They sounded cold and determined in a way that scared him. Zek Miran tried to warn Admiral Vex Talar that something was wrong. He showed the Admiral the strange radio intercepts and explained that human behavior had changed completely after their attack on New Haven. But Vex Talar was too drunk on victory to listen. He told Zek Miran that humans were weak cowards who would surrender now that they knew Zalarian power. Jake Morrison received new orders that made his heart race with anticipation. His ship was told to meet with a special fleet that most people did not even know existed. These were the black ships that appeared on no official records. They carried weapons that violated every treaty about warfare that had ever been signed. Jake had heard rumors about these ships, but he had never seen them before. The meeting point was in empty space, far from any planet or star. When Jake arrived, he saw dozens of human warships unlike anything he had ever imagined. These ships were painted pure black, and they seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. They moved through space without making any sound or leaving any trail behind. The ships looked like they had been designed by people who no longer cared about rules or mercy. Admiral Sullivan herself was commanding this secret fleet from her flagship. When she spoke to Jake over the radio, her voice was calm but deadly. She told him that his mission was to help destroy every Zalarian military base and every Zalarian warship in the galaxy. There would be no prisoners taken and no mercy shown. The Zalarian Empire was going to learn what happened when they murdered human children. Jake looked at the list of targets he was given and felt his breath catch in his throat. The list included every major Zalarian world and every important Zalarian installation. The humans were not planning to win this war by defeating the enemy military. They were planning to erase the Zalarian Empire from existence completely. Back on Earth, ordinary citizens were demanding even more extreme action against the aliens. People who had been peaceful their whole lives were now calling for the total destruction of every Zalarian world. The pictures of the dead children had awakened something primal and terrible in the human spirit. Even small children were drawing pictures of human spaceships destroying alien planets. The Zalarian Empire had made war against humans before and won many battles. They thought they understood human nature and human capabilities. They believed humans were just another weak species that could be bullied and defeated. But they were about to learn that they had never really fought humans before. All the previous battles had just been humans playing by the rules. Now the rules were gone, and the real war was about to begin. 3 months had passed since the terrible day when the orphanage was destroyed. During this time, the Zalarian Empire continued their normal activities without worrying too much about human revenge. They had fought humans before and always won. Admiral Vex Talar was promoted to an even higher position for his successful attack on what they still believed had been a military target. But strange reports were starting to reach Zalarian command centers from their scout ships on the frontier. These small fast ships were supposed to watch human territory and report on enemy activities. The scouts were sending back messages that made no sense to their commanders. They reported seeing massive human fleets appearing out of nowhere and then vanishing just as quickly. The human ships were moving in formations that seemed impossible according to everything the Zalarians knew about space warfare. The Zalarian military leaders dismissed these reports as mistakes or lies. They thought their scouts were either seeing things that were not really there, or they were making up stories to avoid doing their dangerous jobs. None of the high-ranking aliens could believe that humans possessed technology advanced enough to hide entire fleets from detection. Admiral Kate Sullivan was personally commanding the first wave of humanity's response from her flagship. The fleet she led was unlike anything that had ever been assembled in human history. The ships carried weapons that had been locked away for decades because they were considered too terrible to ever use in normal warfare. These weapons had been created by the brightest human minds working in complete secrecy. Dr. Helen Brooks had spent the last 3 months preparing her most devastating inventions for actual combat use. Her laboratories worked around the clock, building devices that could destroy matter at the atomic level. She had created weapons that could turn entire cities into empty space in seconds. Other weapons could make the gravity around a planet so strong that everything on the surface would be crushed flat. The first target chosen for humanity's revenge was a Zalarian mining world called Keth 7. This planet was home to about 2 million alien civilians, but it also had a military base with 50,000 Zalarian soldiers. The base was considered one of the strongest fortresses in the Zalarian Empire. It had powerful shields and enough weapons to destroy 100 normal invasion fleets. Colonel Steve Parker was given command of the human attack on Keth 7. His job was not to invade the planet or capture the military base. His orders were much simpler and much more terrible. He was told to completely destroy every military installation on the planet while leaving the civilian population alive but helpless. The humans wanted the Zalarian people to see what happened when their military leaders made bad decisions. The human attack fleet appeared around Keth 7 without any warning. The Zalarian defenders had no idea the human ships were coming until energy beams started falling from the sky like deadly rain. But these were not ordinary weapons that the aliens had seen before. These new human weapons seemed to ignore the powerful shields protecting the Zalarian base. The first weapon to strike was something Dr. Brooks called a reality distortion bomb. When it exploded above the main Zalarian command center, the building simply stopped existing. It did not burn or collapse or get blown apart. One moment it was there, and the next moment there was just empty space where it used to be. The Zalarian soldiers inside the building vanished along with it as if they had never been born. Other human weapons followed quickly. Nanoswarm devices released clouds of tiny machines that ate through Zalarian armor, and weapons like acid eating through paper. The alien soldiers watched in terror as their tanks and aircraft dissolved into nothing while they were still using them. Some weapons created fields where the laws of physics worked differently, making it impossible for Zalarian equipment to function at all. In just 4 hours, every military installation on Keth 7 had been completely destroyed. Not a single Zalarian soldier was left alive on the planet. But the civilian cities were completely untouched. The human weapons had been so precise that they could destroy a military base without harming a school right next to it. The message was clear. Humans could kill anyone they wanted to kill while protecting anyone they wanted to protect. Admiral Tak Vestan was the Zalarian commander responsible for defending the Keth sector. When he received the emergency signals from Keth 7, he could not believe what he was hearing. According to the reports, the most heavily defended planet in his sector had been completely conquered by human forces in less than half a day. He immediately gathered his strongest fleet and rushed to Keth 7 to drive away the human invaders. What Tak Vestan found when he arrived made him question his own sanity. The human fleet was still orbiting Keth 7, but these ships looked nothing like the human vessels he had fought before. These new ships seemed to phase in and out of normal space like ghosts. When his weapons fired at them, the energy beams passed right through the human ships without doing any damage at all. The human ships fought back with weapons that Tak Vestan could not understand. Some of the weapons seemed to attack his ships from inside, making the metal hull dissolve from within. Other weapons created tiny black holes that sucked entire Zalarian vessels into nothing. The most frightening weapons somehow knew where his ships were going to move before he even gave the orders, hitting targets that should have been impossible to predict. Nancy White was an engineer aboard the human dreadnought called Retribution. Her job was to listen to enemy radio communications and learn what the aliens were thinking. As she monitored the Zalarian emergency channels, she heard something she had never heard before in alien voices. Pure terror. The Zalarian commanders were screaming at each other in panic as their supposedly invincible fleets were destroyed by weapons they could not even see coming. The battle around Keth 7 lasted only 6 hours. When it was over, Admiral Tak Vestan's entire fleet had been eliminated. Not a single human ship had been damaged. The Zalarian admiral himself was captured alive by human boarding teams who seemed to appear on his bridge from nowhere. He was taken prisoner so that he could tell other Zalarian commanders what he had witnessed. News of the disaster at Keth 7 reached the Zalarian homeworld within days. Emperor Zex Thorin called an emergency meeting of his top military advisors to understand how such a thing could have happened. General Cavnexus presented casualty reports that seemed impossible to believe. In just 2 weeks since the human counterattack began, the Zalarian military had lost more ships and soldiers than they had lost in the previous 100 years of warfare combined. The Emperor and his generals studied the reports from Keth 7 and other battle sites. What they read made them realize they had never really been fighting humans before. All the previous battles between their species had been humans holding back and fighting according to the rules of civilized warfare. Now those rules were gone, and the true nature of human military power was being revealed for the first time. Jake Morrison had been given a special mission that he had been waiting for since the day the orphanage was bombed. His target was the Crimson Talon, the same Zalarian ship that had killed the 847 children on New Haven. Admiral Vex Talar was still aboard that ship, probably still celebrating his great victory over what he thought had been a military target. When Jake found the Crimson Talon hiding near a gas giant in the Zirian system, he did not bother to demand surrender or offer terms for peace. The children who had died at Bright Star Orphanage had not been given any chance to surrender. Jake simply activated the most powerful weapon his ship carried and watched as the alien vessel that had murdered innocent children was erased from existence along with every creature aboard it. The war was no longer about territory or mining rights or political power. It had become something much more simple and much more final. The Zalarian Empire was learning what every parent in the galaxy already knew. There is no force in the universe more dangerous than someone who has decided to protect children by destroying those who hurt them. The Zalarian Empire was now desperately trying to contact human leaders to discuss peace terms. They sent messages through every communication channel they could find. They offered to pay huge amounts of money for the damage they had caused. They promised to give humans valuable planets and trade routes. They even offered to give up some of their own territory if humans would just stop the devastating attacks. But every message the Zalarians sent to human space received exactly the same automatic reply. The computer-generated response was always the same cold sentence: no terms will be accepted until total surrender is achieved. No human leader would speak to Zalarian diplomats. No human commander would listen to offers of compromise. The only communication humans were willing to have with Zalarians was the kind delivered by weapons fire. Dr. Helen Brooks was working in her laboratory on the most terrible creation of her entire career. She had been ordered to develop something called the Cascade Protocol. This weapon was designed to attack stars themselves and force them to explode in nova reactions that would destroy everything in an entire solar system. The technology was so dangerous that even Dr. Brooks was frightened by what she was building. The Cascade Protocol worked by sending special particles into the core of a star. These particles would disrupt the nuclear reactions that kept the star stable. Once the process began, nothing could stop the star from exploding and destroying every planet orbiting around it. The weapon could kill billions of people at once and turn thriving solar systems into empty space, filled with deadly radiation. Admiral Kate Sullivan and President Alan Carter met with Dr. Brooks to discuss the new weapon. All three of them understood that the Cascade Protocol crossed a line that no species had ever crossed before. It was one thing to destroy military bases and warships. It was something completely different to destroy entire star systems with all the life they contained. But then Dr. Brooks showed them new pictures from the rebuilt memorial at the site where the Bright Star Orphanage had been. The memorial wall now had 847 small photographs showing the faces of every child who had died in the bombing. There was little Bobby Chen with his toy spaceship. There was Mary Johnson holding the book she had been reading. There was Tommy Rodriguez smiling in the kitchen where he had been helping with dinner. Looking at those innocent faces, President Carter made the hardest decision of his life. He authorized the use of stellar Cascade weapons against uninhabited Zalarian systems. The message would be clear to every species in the galaxy. Humans were willing to destroy entire star systems to end this war. If the Zalarians wanted to continue fighting, they would face the complete annihilation of their civilization. The demonstration took place in the empty Xerion system, where there were no planets with life on them. Human scientists activated a Cascade Protocol device near the system's main star while broadcasting the event live to every corner of known space. Millions of beings across the galaxy watched in horror as the star began to collapse and then exploded in a burst of light that could be seen from hundreds of light years away. Where the Xerion system had existed for billions of years, there was now only a growing cloud of superheated gas and a new black hole that would exist forever, as a monument to human determination. The message was received loud and clear by every alien civilization. Humans possessed the power to destroy star systems, and they were willing to use that power. Lisa Grant was the commander of human intelligence operations. Her job was to spy on enemy communications and learn what the Zalarians were planning. The messages she intercepted after the Xerion demonstration showed that the alien empire was falling apart from within. 3 of the smaller species that had been part of the Zalarian alliance were now trying to make separate peace agreements with humans. The Zalarian military was also beginning to crack under the pressure of constant defeats. General Cav Nexus had been replaced after losing too many battles. His replacement, General Tok Halar, was immediately faced with a rebellion among his own officers who no longer believed the war could be won. Some Zalarian commanders were surrendering their fleets without even fighting. Chris Murphy was a human general who had become famous for developing new battle tactics that seemed almost magical in their effectiveness. His forces could predict where Zalarian ships would appear and have weapons waiting for them. He could coordinate attacks across multiple star systems so perfectly that Zalarian defenders never had time to call for help. Under his command, entire Zalarian battle groups would be eliminated without a single human casualty. The secret to General Murphy's success was not magic, but mathematics. Human computer systems had been analyzing Zalarian behavior patterns for months. They had learned to predict Zalarian military decisions with nearly perfect accuracy. When combined with the new weapons Dr. Brooks had created, this knowledge made human forces almost impossible to defeat. Emperor Zex Thorin was watching his empire crumble around him. Half of his military leaders were dead or captured. His remaining fleets were afraid to leave their bases because human attack groups seemed to be everywhere at once. Several of the species that had been loyal to the Zalarian Empire for centuries were now openly discussing rebellion. Faced with the complete collapse of everything he had built, the Emperor made a decision that would prove to be his final and most terrible mistake. If the Zalarian Empire could not survive this war, then he would make sure that humanity paid the ultimate price for their victory. He ordered his remaining scientists to begin construction of a doomsday weapon that could destroy entire planets with a single shot. The Zalarian planet killer was designed to create artificial black holes that would consume any world they were aimed at. The Emperor's plan was simple. If he could destroy Earth itself, the human war effort would collapse and the surviving humans would be too grief-stricken to continue fighting. He believed that by killing the human homeworld, he could save what remained of his empire. Dan Clark was a human spy who had been living in Zalarian territory for over a year. He had undergone surgical changes to look like an alien, and he had learned to speak their language perfectly. His mission was to gather intelligence about Zalarian plans and activities. When he learned about the Emperor's doomsday weapon project, he immediately sent an encrypted message back to Human Command. The message Dan sent was brief, but it changed everything. Enemy building planet killer weapon. Target is Earth. Construction 60% complete. Recommend immediate action. When this intelligence reached Admiral Sullivan and President Carter, they realized that the war had entered its final and most dangerous phase. An emergency meeting was called with all the top human military commanders. They gathered in the same underground room where they had first planned their response to the Orphanage bombing. But now, the situation was even more serious. The Zalarians were trying to build a weapon that could destroy the human homeworld and kill everyone living there. Admiral Sullivan presented the options to the War Council. They could try to capture the doomsday weapon before it was completed, but this would be extremely dangerous and might not succeed. They could negotiate with the Zalarians and try to find a compromise that would stop construction of the weapon, or they could ensure that the weapon could never be completed by taking more drastic action. The vote was unanimous. Every single commander in the room agreed that the risk to Earth was too great to allow the Zalarian Empire to continue existing. The Doomsday Weapon Project proved that the aliens would never stop trying to hurt humans no matter how badly they were defeated in battle. The only way to protect Earth and all the human colonies was to end the Zalarian Empire completely. President Carter signed the final authorization for something called the Genesis Protocol. This was even more terrible than the Cascade weapons because it could destroy entire planets without harming their star systems. Dr. Brooks had created devices that could restructure matter on a planetary scale, turning living worlds into dead rocks while leaving everything else in the solar system unchanged. The order went out to every human fleet and every human commander across the galaxy. The war was entering its final phase. There would be no more selective targeting of military installations. No more attempts to spare civilian populations. The Zalarian Empire had chosen to threaten Earth itself, and now they would face the consequences of that choice. Every major Zalarian world would be targeted for complete destruction. The final phase of humanity's revenge began with the deployment of ships so secret that most humans did not even know they existed. These vessels had been built in hidden shipyards far from any inhabited system. They were painted in colors that seemed to absorb light itself, and they moved through space without making any sound or leaving any trace behind them. The aliens had no idea these ships were coming until death arrived at their doorstep. Captain Amy Foster commanded the lead ship in this death fleet. Her vessel was called the TSF Apocalypse, and it carried weapons that could unmake matter at the level of individual atoms. The ship's hull was covered in technology that Dr. Helen Brooks had spent years perfecting. These were not just weapons of war, but instruments of complete annihilation that could erase entire civilizations from existence. Dr. Brooks was personally overseeing the final deployment of her most terrible creation. The Genesis Protocol devices were loaded aboard the human death ships, like bombs being prepared for the largest military operation in galactic history. Each device was capable of restructuring all the matter on an entire planet, turning thriving worlds full of life into barren rocks spinning through empty space. The primary target for this ultimate weapon was the Zalarian homeworld of Zek Prime. This ancient planet was home to 12 billion aliens who had never personally done anything to hurt humans. Most of them were ordinary people who worked normal jobs and raised families just like humans did. They had children who played games and went to school. They had parents and grandparents who told stories about the old days. But Zek Prime was also the heart of the empire that had murdered 847 human children. It was the world where Emperor Zex Thorin lived, and where he had made the decision to bomb the Bright Star Orphanage. It was the place where Admiral Vex Taller had been celebrated as a hero for killing innocent children, and it was where the Doomsday weapon meant to destroy Earth was being built in secret military laboratories. General Chris Murphy coordinated the attack from his command ship positioned at the edge of the Zek system. His job was to make sure that every major Zalarian world was hit at exactly the same time, so that none of them could warn the others or try to escape. This required perfect timing across distances of hundreds of light years and the coordination of thousands of human warships. The human fleet that surrounded Zek Prime was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. There were more ships than anyone could count, and they carried enough firepower to destroy 1,000 worlds. But they were not there to conquer or occupy the planet below. They were there to demonstrate the absolute futility of resistance to human will. Emperor Zex Thorin was in his palace when the human ships appeared in his system. He had been receiving reports of disasters from across his empire, but he had refused to believe that humans could really threaten his homeworld. The capital planet of the Zalarian Empire was protected by orbital fortresses and defensive satellites that had never been defeated in 1,000 years of warfare. General Murphy sent a final message to the Emperor before the attack began. The transmission was broadcast on every frequency so that every alien on every Zalarian world could hear it. The message was simple and final. You bombed a human orphanage. You killed 847 innocent children. You threatened to destroy our homeworld. Now your civilization will pay the price. You have 24 hours to surrender unconditionally or watch everything you have ever built turn to dust. Emperor Zex Thorin's response was broadcast back to the human fleet, with all the arrogance that had led his species to this moment of doom. His voice was full of pride and defiance as he declared that Zellarians would never bow to an inferior species. He called humans weak and cowardly. He said that his people would fight to the last alien rather than submit to human authority. The Emperor's words were recorded and transmitted to every human ship in the galaxy. When Captain Amy Foster heard them, she felt no anger or hatred. She felt only the cold determination of someone who had been given an unpleasant but necessary job to do. She activated the Genesis protocol weapons and watched as 12 billion lives were about to be extinguished because their leader had chosen pride over wisdom. The Genesis weapons did not create explosions or fires when they struck the Zellarian worlds. Instead, they simply changed the basic structure of matter itself. Buildings that had stood for thousands of years crumbled into dust in seconds. The great cities where millions of aliens had lived and worked became empty plains covered in gray ash. The oceans boiled away into steam and the atmosphere was torn apart at the molecular level. On Zek Prime, Emperor Zex Thorin had just enough time to understand what was happening before his palace dissolved around him. His final words were recorded by human listening devices. "What have we done? What have we awakened?" Then he and his entire world were gone, leaving behind only a dead rock orbiting a star that would shine on nothing but empty space for the rest of eternity. The coordinated attack lasted exactly 6 hours. In that brief span of time, every major Zellarian world was transformed from a living planet into a lifeless wasteland. Their fleets were reduced to clouds of metallic dust drifting through space. Their space stations and orbital fortresses simply ceased to exist. The Zellarian Empire that had ruled 12 star systems for centuries was erased from the galaxy as completely as if it had never existed. Jake Morrison, now promoted to Admiral, stood on the bridge of his ship watching the destruction of the last Zellarian stronghold. The enemy doomsday weapon that would have been used to destroy Earth was floating powerless in space, half completed and forever useless. His engineer Nancy White reported that total Zellarian military capacity had been reduced to absolute zero. The few Zellarian survivors who had been on ships or space stations far from their homeworlds when the attack began tried to surrender, but surrender was no longer an option. The human response to their empire's crimes was not conquest or occupation, but complete and total annihilation. Every Zellarian military vessel was hunted down and destroyed. Every Zellarian leader was captured or killed. Some alien civilians managed to survive by fleeing to neutral worlds that had stayed out of the war. These refugees would spend the rest of their lives as reminders of what happened when a species decided to murder human children. They would tell their own children and grandchildren about the day their entire civilization was destroyed, because their leaders had made the mistake of thinking humans were weak. President Alan Carter addressed the galaxy from what had once been the capital city of the Zellarian Empire. Now he stood on a world covered in gray dust where nothing would ever grow again. His message was broadcast to every species in known space. We are human. We protect our own. We remember our dead. And we do not forgive those who harm our children. The other alien civilizations watching from afar took careful note of what they had witnessed. Humanity had once been considered a minor species that had only recently developed space travel. They were supposed to be peaceful traders and explorers who preferred negotiation to warfare. But the destruction of the Zellarian Empire proved that humans had earned their place among the stars through their absolute refusal to accept the unacceptable. The Bright Star Orphanage was rebuilt on New Haven exactly as it had been before the bombing. A memorial wall was added with the names and pictures of all 847 children who had died there. The inscription on the wall was simple, but it carried a message that would be remembered for thousands of years. They were loved. They are remembered. They are avenged. In the months following the war, humanity returned to their normal activities of peaceful exploration and trade with other species. But every alien civilization in the galaxy now understood a fundamental truth about human nature. Humans were, indeed, the kindest and most compassionate species anyone had ever encountered. They would share their food with strangers and risk their lives to help others in need. but they were also the most terrifyingly efficient killers in the known universe. When someone crossed the line that should never be crossed, the Zalarian Empire had learned too late that there was no force in creation more dangerous than a human who had decided that someone needed to be destroyed for hurting innocent children. 5 years after the war ended, Ambassador Patricia Johnson was negotiating humanity's first post-war alliance with a species called the Corinthian Republic. The alien delegates were respectful almost to the point of reverence as they discussed trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. They remembered what had happened to the last species that had underestimated human resolve. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity not for their cruelty, but for their capacity for absolute and methodical destruction when their moral boundaries were violated. The empty worlds that had once been the Zalarian Empire served as a permanent reminder visible from space. Other species built monuments to celebrate their victories in war. Humans built monuments to remember their dead, and they made sure that those who killed the innocent would never be forgotten either, even if they had to be remembered as dust scattered across lifeless worlds that would orbit cold stars until the end of time itself.